Have you ever sat quietly on a plane, just hoping for peace, only to be reminded that some people still see color before character? Imagine you're thousands of feet in the air, surrounded by strangers, when a cup of scalding coffee lands on you, not by accident, but by hate. Would you stay silent to preserve your dignity, or stand up and risk everything for the truth? This isn't just a story about a flight gone wrong. It's about who we become when the world tests our humanity. A powerful black CEO, calm yet wounded. A man who hides behind privilege until it's stripped away midair. And a father, once the head of aviation safety, who steps in, not with anger, but with justice. If it were you up there, what would you have done? Would you let anger speak or let grace carry your strength? Stay with us to see how a moment of cruelty in the clouds turned into a lesson that reached the ground and changed hearts forever. Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe to our channel for more stories that remind us what humanity truly means. The hum of the aircraft engines was steady, like a heartbeat in the sky. Outside the cabin windows, the night was velvet, New York fading beneath a trail of orange city lights, the stars beginning to claim the darkness above. Inside, the hush of luxury reigned. Crystal glasses clinked. Soft leather creaked. Flight attendants moved in practiced silence, offering warmth in a space colder than 30,000 feet should ever feel. In seat 3A, Ariana Cole rested her head against the window. The faint reflection that stared back at her was a mix of exhaustion and poise. At 35, Ariana was the CEO of EduBridge, a tech startup that built online programs for underfunded schools. She had spent the week in Manhattan pitching to investors, shaking hands with men who smiled at her resume but underestimated her all the same. It wasn't new. She'd long learned to turn skepticism into fuel. Now, on this quiet overnight flight to San Francisco, all she wanted was peace, a few hours of stillness above the clouds before another round of meetings and headlines waited for her in the morning. Her seatmate, however, seemed to have other plans. The man in 3B was in his late 50s, silver-haired, with the sharp kind of suit that screamed old money. His name tag on the briefcase read Edward Langston, and from the moment he sat down, his sighs filled the air like tiny storms. When the attendant offered him champagne, he waved her off with a dismissive flick of his hand. "Do you have something French?" he asked, his tone suggesting disappointment with the entire airline. Ariana glanced up briefly, offering a polite smile. "Long night ahead?" she asked lightly. He looked at her. Really looked at her. His eyes traveled from her braided bun to her tailored navy blazer, then down to the book on her lap, leading through chaos. His expression shifted, a subtle sneer flickering before he replied. "Just not used to such diversity in first class," he said. A laugh almost followed the words, but it wasn't the kind meant to be shared. Ariana's fingers tautened around the armrest. She could have said something she'd done it before. But she also remembered what her father had told her years ago, when a client mistook her for the assistant at her own company. "Not every battle needs your blood, baby girl. Some are won in silence by refusing to be moved." So, she smiled, calm, practiced, unbothered. "I hope the flight's comfortable for you," she said simply, and turned her gaze back to the window. But Edward wasn't done. As the flight settled into cruising altitude, he made small talk with the attendant loudly. "Do you know, first-class standards are slipping these days. Used to be a place for professionals. Now anyone can buy their way in." The attendant, Mia Tran, a petite woman in her 20s, smiled politely but avoided responding. She'd seen this type before, the kind who mistook wealth for worth. Ariana opened her laptop, trying to lose herself in work, but every few minutes she felt his stare, like a cold draft brushing her shoulder. When she looked his way, he'd avert his eyes, muttering something about manners. Outside, the moonlight caught the wing of the aircraft, silver against black. Ariana found herself sketching its curve on a napkin, an old habit she'd kept since childhood. It calmed her. The symmetry of flight, the promise of control in chaos. Her father had once explained to her how lift worked, how balance was everything. Even at 30,000 feet, he'd said, gravity still has rules, so does decency. She smiled at the memory, then caught Edward watching again. "Is there something I can help you with, sir?" she asked, her voice steady but firm. He leaned back, arms crossed. "Just wondering what you people do when you're not flying so high." The air between them turned sharp. For a moment, she thought she'd misheard him, but the glint of arrogance in his eyes said otherwise. Mia passed by again, refilling drinks. The tension was thick enough to feel. Ariana gave a small shake of her head, as if to say, "It's fine." She didn't want a scene, not yet. As Mia moved down the aisle, Ariana whispered under her breath, "Stay calm. Let the sky see your grace." Edward opened a magazine and laughed under his breath. To him, it was a normal evening, a flight where he could assert his invisible dominance, one small insult at a time. To Ariana, it was another reminder of how easily prejudice tried to masquerade as humor. She returned to her napkin sketch, the wing now extended perfectly into the horizon line, a line that seemed to divide more than sky and earth, that divided who she was and how the world insisted on seeing her. The captain's voice came over the intercom. "Ladies and gentlemen, we're at 33,000 feet, cruising steady. Estimated arrival in San Francisco is on time, just before dawn." A ripple of relief passed through the cabin. Ariana closed her laptop. She let her body sink into the seat, letting the hum of the engines lull her. For a brief, rare moment, she allowed herself to rest. Then came Edward's voice again, low, almost to himself, but loud enough to pierce through the calm. "Some people never know their place." Ariana's eyes opened slowly. The words hung in the air, heavy, deliberate. Her pulse quickened, but her face stayed still. She turned toward the window, away from him, away from the ignorance trying to provoke her. In the reflection of the glass, she saw both of their faces, hers, composed and silent, his smirking in self-satisfaction. Two passengers, two worlds, the only thing between them, the thin line of an armrest and the invisible wall of everything he believed she shouldn't be. The engines droned on, indifferent, steady as ever, but somewhere inside Ariana, a storm was beginning to gather, not of rage, but of resolve, because she knew something Edward Langston didn't. Some storms don't roar, they wait, and when they break, they change the entire sky. The cabin lights dimmed to a soft amber hue as dinner service began. The hum of the engines turned almost hypnotic, blending with the clinking of cutlery and muffled conversations. Ariana adjusted her seat slightly, still feeling the weight of Edward's earlier remark press against her composure. She had hoped that silence would dissolve his need to provoke her, but silence, she was learning again, could be mistaken for permission. Mia approached from the galley, offering dinner trays with her usual grace. "Ms. Cole, chicken or salmon?" Tonight, she asked. Salmon, thank you, Ariana replied, her tone warm, measured. Edward didn't miss a beat. Make mine steak rare, he said, before adding with a faint chuckle, I guess we all have our preferences right. The remark hung in the air. His smirk made it clear the sentence carried more than culinary meaning. Ariana's jaw tightened, but her face remained unreadable. Mia's hand hesitated just a fraction before she placed the plate down. She caught Ariana's eyes for a brief moment, an unspoken understanding. One woman recognizing the battle, another was fighting behind calm eyes. When Mia moved on, Edward unfolded his napkin with exaggerated precision. I've been reading about startups lately, he said, stabbing a piece of steak with his fork. It's admirable, I suppose, what you people are doing teaching kids and all that. Must be exhausting trying to fix the world. Ariana looked at him, her tone polite but firm. We don't fix the world, Mr. Langston. We give kids a fair chance to enter it. He raised a brow. Charming. Do they listen? She smiled, a small one that didn't reach her eyes. You'd be surprised how much people can learn when someone believes they're capable. For the first time, he looked momentarily unsettled, but it passed quickly, replaced with the same self-satisfied grin. Confidence, he said. You've got plenty of it. He leaned closer. Though, between us, it can be misunderstood in certain circles. The implication wasn't lost on her. She turned slightly toward the aisle, creating a physical barrier between them. Outside the window, the moonlight reflected on the clouds like broken glass. She tried to focus on her laptop screen again, drafting a short proposal to refine an education platform. But the cursor blinked uselessly on an empty document. Every tap of the keys felt heavier. Each word she deleted felt like given ground. Her mind wandered back to the conference earlier that day, where an investor had told her, smiling, "You're very articulate, Ariana." It had been meant as a compliment, but she knew what it meant, surprise. Surprise that she spoke like someone who belonged in that room. She breathed deeply, remembering her father's words. Composure is not surrender. It's the moment before truth lands. The attendant returned to collect the trays. Mia's movements were brisk now, her eyes flicking between Ariana and Edward. She could feel something building, a tension no amount of professionalism could smooth over. "Can I get you anything else?" Mia asked, glancing at Ariana's half-empty glass. "Just coffee, please." As Mia turned, Edward laughed softly. "Oh, coffee. Brave choice. I'd be careful this airline can't seem to serve it right these days." It was a small jab, almost meaningless, but his tone carried the same condescension he'd worn since boarding a slow drip of disrespect disguised as civility. When the coffee arrived, the cup trembled slightly in Mia's hand as the plane hit a mild pocket of turbulence. Ariana steadied it with a soft smile. "Got it. Thanks." "Of course," Mia said, relief flickering through her features. Edward took his black coffee too, sniffing it before muttering, "Figures, tastes burnt." Ariana ignored him. She opened the book tucked beside her seat, leading through chaos, and traced a line she'd underlined months ago. "The higher you rise, the thinner the air and the louder the echoes of those who can't follow." The line resonated differently tonight. She could feel those echoes in Edward's voice, in the way his casual disdain tried to pull her down to his level. Half an hour passed in uneasy quiet. The cabin darkened further, and passengers began to doze. Ariana closed her laptop, adjusting the blanket across her lap. The scent of coffee lingered between them, bitter, sharp. She almost managed to drift toward rest when she heard a low chuckle beside her. Edward was watching a news clip on his tablet. The headline glowed faintly, corporate diversity, trend or token. He looked at her as if to invite comment. Ever wonder if it's just fashionable? He asked. Excuse me, this whole thing, he continued, waving vaguely toward her, the cabin, the world beyond. All these diversity programs, quotas, it's not about merit anymore. It's optics. Ariana sat up slowly. Merit, she repeated. Her voice was quiet, but something in it made him falter. Yes, he said, defensive now. People like me, people who worked for decades, get sidelined so corporations can check boxes. She studied him, her eyes calm, steady. Maybe, she said softly, it's not that you're being sidelined. Maybe others are finally being seen. He scoffed, but his expression flickered again. He didn't expect her to answer at all. The plane shook slightly as it hit another stream of air. Edward reached for his cup, his elbow jutting too wide and the coffee tipped dangerously close to Ariana's side. She flinched instinctively, pulling back just in time. Her heart skipped. The liquid stopped short of her sleeve. But the movement wasn't lost on Mia, who turned sharply from the galley. Everything okay here, she asked. Edward gave a dismissive wave. All fine, just a little turbulence, though someone's jumpy. He grinned at Ariana, the kind of grin that dared her to react. She didn't. Not yet. Mia hesitated before moving on. She could feel the discomfort rolling off Ariana like heat. Ariana stared out the window again. Beneath the plane, endless darkness stretched between coasts. She thought about the distance between the life she had built and the ignorance that still found her. It followed her into boardrooms, headlines, and now 30,000 feet in the air. But something in her shifted that moment. She wasn't going to shrink to fit the silence around him anymore. She reached into her bag, pulled out a small notebook, and began to write not emails, not strategies, but words meant only for herself. Even in the sky, she wrote, gravity finds us, but dignity lets us fly. She closed the notebook, tucked it away, and whispered under her breath, almost a prayer. Stay steady. Mia returned once more to check the cabin, offering warm towels. Ariana thanked her softly. Edward didn't look up, muttering something about service standards. As the lights dimmed completely, Ariana closed her eyes, willing herself to sleep. She didn't know that before dawn. That same cup of coffee would turn from an insult into an incident that would change the course of more than one life on board. The engines roared gently, steady and endless. Above the world, calm lingered for now. The hum of the jet never changed. It was the one constant above the clouds, steady and indifferent. Yet inside Ariana's chest, everything was shifting. The taste of that conversation lingered, acrid as burnt coffee. She sat still, hands folded, the dim glow from her seat's reading light painting her skin in muted gold. Around her, first-class passengers began to fade into half-sleep. Screens dimmed, blankets drawn. The silence was thick, comfortable for everyone except her. Edward had finally stopped talking, but silence, she realized, didn't mean peace. It only meant pause. Ariana reached for her phone, opened her notes app, and began jotting stray thoughts, new features for Edu Bridge's mobile version. Reminders for her San Francisco meeting. A quote her father once said, "Power doesn't always raise its voice. but it always leaves an echo. Her chest tightened slightly. It had been months since she'd seen him. Douglas Cole, her father, had retired from the Federal Aviation Administration the previous year, but his voice still carried the kind of gravity that could steady any storm. She remembered the last time they'd spoken face to face, on his porch in Virginia, sunlight filtering through magnolia trees. He'd been tinkering with an old radio, wires and static everywhere, while she vented about a board meeting gone wrong. They said my presence would change the optics, she'd told him bitterly. He'd looked up, eyes soft but unflinching, then changed them. He'd said simply, "But don't let anyone make you smaller to fit their picture." Now, thousands of feet above ground, that memory burned bright. A soft chime cut through her thoughts, the call button from row 3B. Edward again. Mia moved quickly, smile rehearsed but eyes weary. "Yes, sir." He gestured toward his empty cup. "More coffee, black, and make sure it's hot this time." Mia nodded, biting her tongue, and disappeared toward the galley. Ariana exhaled quietly. There was a rhythm to men like him, a performance of power, one that relied on others not calling it out, and she knew the cost of interrupting that rhythm. The looks, the headlines, emotional, aggressive, unprofessional, words that latched onto women like her far too easily. But as she watched Mia hurry back, she felt something stir a protective ache. She recognized that same tension in the young attendant's shoulders, the same exhaustion of smiling through someone else's superiority. Mia placed the cup carefully in front of Edward. "Here you go, sir. Fresh and hot." He didn't thank her. Instead, he sniffed it again and muttered, "Took long enough." Then, as if fate wanted to punctuate the cruelty, turbulence hit, just a brief jolt, but enough to tip the cup sideways. A splash of steaming liquid flew across the small gap, landing squarely on Ariana's lap. The shock made her gasp. The heat seared through fabric and skin before her body could react. The smell of roasted coffee filled the air. Mia froze. Edward's eyes widened, but only for a second. Then, unbelievably, he chuckled. "Oh, for heaven's sake, maybe next time. Keep your elbows to yourself." Ariana stared at him. "You spilled it." He shrugged. "If you say so." Mia grabbed a towel, stammering apologies, reaching to dab at the stain, but Ariana held up a hand. Her voice was low but steady. "It's fine, Mia. Not your fault." Her palm trembled slightly, but not from the burn. It was from the effort to contain herself. Every nerve screamed for her to stand up, to call him out in front of everyone. But instead, she breathed slow, deliberate. She looked around. Some passengers pretended not to notice, others whispered behind hands. Eyes slid away as if politeness was a shield against responsibility. That silence, that complicity hurt more than the burn. Edward leaned back, voice dripping with mock civility. "You people are always so dramatic." The words cracked through her restraint. She turned toward him fully, eyes steady, voice calm. "I think you've said enough." He smirked. "Just an accident, Ms. Cole. Don't make it a headline." Mia's voice trembled as she spoke. "Sir, please don't speak to her that way." He turned on her next. "Excuse me. You work for me right now, young lady. I'd suggest you remember that." Ariana placed a hand lightly on Mia's arm. "It's okay." But Mia's face had gone pale. She muttered, "No, it's not." She hurried toward the cockpit, the soft click of her heels cutting through the cabin's heavy air. Edward crossed his arms. Some people just can't take a joke. Ariana pressed the cool towel against her leg. The pain throbbed. But the deeper burn was humiliation, the knowledge that in a cabin full of witnesses, one man's prejudice could still go unchecked. A few rows back, a man in a gray sweater cleared his throat. "I saw what happened," he said quietly. "That wasn't an accident." Ariana turned to him, eyes grateful. "Thank you." Edward shot the man a glare. "Mind your own business." But the seed had been planted. The murmurs spread. People shifted in their seats. Discomfort rippling through the cabin. Ariana closed her eyes briefly. She thought of her father again, how he'd once handled a similar situation at an airport when security detained him for questioning after a misunderstanding. He'd stayed calm, even as they questioned his credentials. Later that night, she'd asked him how he didn't lose his temper. He'd said, "Because anger burns hot and quick. But justice takes patience." Her breathing slowed. She reached for her phone, not to post, not to rant, but to document. A few discreet photos, the coffee stain, the nameplate on his briefcase. Her notes would be facts, not fury. Mia returned, face tight but determined. "Ms. Cole, can you please stay seated? Captain Rivera would like a quick word once it's safe." Edward scoffed. "Oh, this ought to be good." Ariana said nothing. Her pulse was steady again. Minutes later, a calm voice came over the intercom. "Ladies and gentlemen, we've encountered mild turbulence. Please remain seated with your seat belts fastened." But Ariana caught something in the tone, controlled, deliberate. She looked toward the front of the cabin, where the cockpit door had cracked open. A shadow moved within, and she caught the faint glint of a badge, Federal Aviation emblem. Her breath caught. She didn't know it yet, but that symbol would soon turn this flight from a humiliation into a reckoning. Edward leaned back, satisfied the storm had passed. He reached for his tablet again, oblivious, but Ariana sat quietly, eyes fixed on the seatbelt light. Somewhere deep within, she felt the shift like air pressure before thunder. Not fear, not anger, something larger. Resolve. Outside, the clouds had thickened. Moonlight swallowed whole. The engines hummed, steady and endless. The flight pressed on into the dark, and for the first time that night, Ariana wasn't the one shrinking from the silence. She was waiting for the sky to change. The cabin had fallen into a strange half-light. Somewhere between midnight and dawn, a low murmur of engines filled the air like an endless exhale from the sky itself. Most passengers were sleeping or pretending to. But in row 3A, Ariana Cole sat upright, still and alert, her fingers resting on the towel cooling her leg. The scalding had left a faint pink mark, a reminder of both the pain and the moment she decided she would no longer stay quiet. Edward Langston, across the armrest, was now pretending none of it had happened. He scrolled through his emails, the faint glow of his tablet reflecting on his smug expression. His posture was relaxed, almost triumphant. In his world, silence equaled victory. But Ariana wasn't silent anymore. She just hadn't spoken yet. Mia returned from the galley, her steps slower now, more deliberate. Her professional mask was cracking around the edges, worry etched deep in her expression. She leaned close to Ariana and whispered, "Captain Rivera's been informed. He's taking this seriously." "Thank you," Ariana said softly. "I'll be fine." Mia hesitated. "Do you want to make a report when we land?" Ariana met her eyes. "Yes, but not when we land. Now." Mia blinked. Now, yes. I need to make a call. It wasn't a statement made from anger. It was calm, precise, the tone of a woman used to making decisions that carried weight. Mia hesitated for only a moment before nodding. Follow me. She guided Ariana down the narrow aisle toward the galley. A few passengers stirred, whispering as they watched. Edward looked up from his screen, an uneasy frown creasing his face. "Where do you think you're going?" he called after her. Ariana didn't turn. "Somewhere you'll wish I hadn't." The galley lights glowed softly against stainless steel. Mia offered her a seat on the fold-down bench beside a panel of controls. "I'll get you access to the satellite phone. I'll need the captain's permission. Tell him it's a safety matter," Ariana said. Her voice carried a gravity that made Mia pause. Within minutes, Captain Rivera appeared at the galley door, his uniform crisp, his face composed. "Ms. Cole," he said respectfully, "I understand something happened with another passenger." Ariana nodded. "It wasn't an accident, Captain, and it wasn't just coffee." Rivera studied her, his brow furrowing. "I saw the report from my crew. It mentioned aggressive behavior and possible verbal harassment." "He threw it," Ariana said quietly, "on purpose." After a series of racist remarks, in front of witnesses, Rivera's jaw tightened. "Understood." He turned to Mia. "Activate the sat phone. I'll log the call as emergency use." Ariana reached for the receiver, her fingers steady. She dialed a number she hadn't used in months but knew by heart. It rang once, twice, then a deep, steady voice answered. Douglas Cole speaking. "Dad," she whispered, and the tremor in that single word said everything. There was a pause. Then his tone sharpened, not with panic, but with control, the voice of a man who'd spent decades handling crises in the sky. "Ari, where are you? Starlight Flight 241, first class. There's been an incident." "What kind of incident?" She swallowed hard. "A man poured hot coffee on me. Intentionally." Silence, but it wasn't empty. It was the sound of a mind moving fast. "Are you hurt a bit?" "I'll be okay." "What's his name?" "Edward Langston." "Seat 3B." Douglas exhaled, long and slow. "Okay, listen carefully. The crew will keep you safe. I'm going to make some calls. You won't have to lift another finger." Ariana hesitated. "Dad, don't." He interrupted gently. "I'm not escalating this, sweetheart. I'm ensuring the system works like it should." His tone softened. "You remember what I always told you about the air?" She smiled faintly through the ache in her chest. "That it holds people accountable." "That's right," he said, "because up there, one person's arrogance can endanger everyone. No one is above consequence, not even at 30,000 feet. He paused. "Put the captain on the line." Rivera took the receiver, standing straight. "Captain Rivera here." "Captain," Douglas said. "Douglas Cole, former FAA Director of Aviation Operations. You'll be receiving contact from current FAA security channels shortly. This passenger's behavior constitutes an in-flight assault. I'd advise isolating him and logging the event immediately." "Yes, sir," Rivera replied. His tone shifted to crisp professionalism. "We'll follow protocol." When the call ended, Ariana sat still, her breathing even. She hadn't wanted her father to intervene, but she also knew he didn't act out of vengeance. He acted from principle. Rivera knelt beside her seat, voice low. "Ms. Cole, I'll move Mr. Langston to a rear section once we land. Until then, you stay here. We'll handle the rest. Thank you, Captain." She looked out the small galley window. The horizon was beginning to glow with the faintest thread of dawn. It bled pale gold into the clouds, a quiet promise that the night, like every injustice, was never endless. Meanwhile, in row 3B, Edward shifted uncomfortably. Something in the air had changed. The crew's energy was different, colder, more deliberate. When he tried to order another drink, Mia's response was professional but distant. "I'm sorry, sir," she said. "We've been instructed not to serve further beverages until landing." He frowned. By who? The captain. He scoffed. Ridiculous. But as he looked around, the eyes of other passengers told him he'd lost control of the narrative. A man in 4A was quietly filming. Another passenger whispered, "That's the guy." Edward's chest tightened. For the first time, arrogance gave way to a flicker of unease. Back in the galley, Ariana sat quietly, cradling a cup of cool water against her burn. The adrenaline had faded, replaced by an odd calm. Mia leaned beside her, voice soft. "You okay?" Ariana nodded. "Better now. Thank you for believing me." "Of course," Mia said. "People like him." She stopped, searching for words. "People like him have always existed." Ariana finished gently, "But they don't get to win forever." Mia smiled faintly, as if holding back tears. "You're strong." Ariana looked out the window again. The sun had just breached the horizon, rays cutting through clouds like forgiveness after fury. "Sometimes strength," she said softly, "is just remembering you're not alone." In the cockpit, Rivera's radio buzzed with a new directive. "Starlight 241, be advised. Upon landing at San Francisco International, you'll be rerouted to a secure bay at Gate 82. Federal officers will meet you on arrival. Confirm acknowledgement." Rivera confirmed. Acknowledged. 82 Secure Bay. He looked at his co-pilot. "Looks like we've got company waiting." As the plane continued westward, the passengers settled again, unaware of the machinery of justice now quietly moving below them. Edward adjusted his tie, trying to convince himself it was all overreaction, that a simple misunderstanding couldn't lead to anything serious. But when he caught Mia's glance sharp, unyielding, he sensed it wasn't misunderstanding anymore. It was consequence. And, sitting at the edge of the galley, Ariana Cole exhaled slowly, watching the sunlight crawl across the cabin floor. It felt like clarity. It felt like something bigger than revenge. It felt like truth finally finding its altitude. The sun had begun to peek through the cabin windows, casting long amber streaks across the aisle. A new light settled on everything: the passengers, the seats, even the tension that hadn't yet broken. In her seat, Ariana sat upright, the towel gone, her burned skin stinging beneath cool fabric. She had cleaned the mark, but not the memory. Every so often, she could feel the faint pulse where the coffee had hit her, a reminder that cruelty rarely leaves quietly. Edward Langston sat a few rows behind now, moved at Captain Rivera's instruction for safety reasons. His pride had been bruised more than he would ever admit. He'd argued loudly at first, but the captain's tone had left no room for debate. The humiliation simmered in him, turning to a quiet, toxic anger. He couldn't understand how things had spiraled. In his mind, he was the victim now, a man misjudged for a simple accident. He muttered under his breath, "Ridiculous. Everyone's too sensitive these days." Mia, passing by to check on passengers, heard it but said nothing. Her training had taught her restraint, but her instincts told her that silence could sometimes mean complicity. She stopped by Ariana's seat, speaking softly. "They've contacted the ground. There'll be officers waiting when we land." Ariana nodded. "Thank you. You've done more than enough already." Mia's lips pressed into a thin line. "Not enough, but at least someone's listening now." Outside, the Pacific clouds rolled below like slow-moving waves. The aircraft glided above them, serene on the surface, but everyone on board could feel the shift. Something had cracked open in the quiet. Ariana opened her journal again, scribbling thoughts as the cabin hummed. She wrote not about anger, but about responsibility. She thought of her employees, the young black interns she mentored, the little girls who watched her speeches online. She wrote, "When they try to take your dignity, remember it's yours because you live it, not because they grant it." Her pen paused. She stared at the words until they blurred into a soft haze. For the first time since the incident, her breath came easy. The intercom clicked. Captain Rivera's calm baritone filled the air. "Ladies and gentlemen, we've received new instructions from ground control. We'll begin our descent shortly. Please fasten your seat belts and remain seated." The murmur of voices followed. Edward shifted restlessly in his seat, glancing around. A secure landing. He mocked under his breath, "Overspilled coffee." A man across the aisle said quietly, "It wasn't just coffee, and you know it." Edward turned sharply. "Excuse me." The man, middle-aged and composed, met his glare. "We all saw what happened. You didn't just spill it, you aimed it." Edward's jaw clenched. "You're mistaken." The other man shrugged. "Am I funny? How everyone else in this cabin saw it differently." The tension snapped like static. A few heads turned. Edward looked around and suddenly realized no one was on his side anymore. Not a single pair of eyes offered him the comfort of agreement. The power he'd carried like armor had begun to slip. Meanwhile, Ariana sat still, listening to the low exchange behind her but refusing to turn. She didn't need to. The truth no longer required her defense. It had witnesses now. Mia returned to her seat near the front, exchanging a glance with Captain Rivera through the open cockpit door. He gave a subtle nod. The plan was in motion. Minutes passed. The cabin lights brightened as the aircraft began to descend. The sound of gears extending under the floor filled the silence, a deep, mechanical sigh. Ariana closed her eyes, feeling the gentle drop in altitude press her into the seat. The descent always felt symbolic to her, a reminder that even the most stable flight eventually has to return to the world below, where accountability waits. Her phone buzzed softly on the tray table. A message came through now that signal bars flickered to life. It was from her father. "Landing teams are ready. Stay composed. The system is watching." She smiled faintly. He always knew exactly when to remind her that calm wasn't weakness. It was strength disguised as stillness. The wheels touched down with a gentle thud, followed by the roar of the reverse thrust. A collective exhale filled the cabin. Relief, completion, but not closure, not yet. Captain Rivera's voice returned. "Ladies and gentlemen, please remain seated. We'll be stopping briefly on a restricted runway before proceeding to the gate. Thank you for your patience." Edward frowned, tugging at his tie. "Restricted. This is absurd. I have meetings to attend." No one replied. Outside, the view shifted rows of emergency vehicles, blinking amber lights, and two black SUVs waiting by a gate marked 82B, FAA security access only. Ariana's pulse quickened not from fear, but anticipation. She recognized the insignia on one of the cars. It was the FAA's field division, her father's people. Mia approached Ariana quietly. "They're here for him, aren't they?" Ariana nodded, and for the truth. The aircraft came to a stop. The engines powered down slowly, replaced by the whine of the auxiliary systems. A moment later, 2 officers boarded calm, professional, their badges glinting in the cabin light. The first spoke clearly. "Mr. Edward Langston." He straightened in his seat. "Yes, that's me. What's the meaning of this, sir? We need to speak with you regarding an onboard incident involving assault and harassment. Please gather your belongings." Edward's face flushed red. "Assault? You can't be serious." The officer's tone didn't waver. "You can cooperate voluntarily, or we can escalate. Your choice, sir." Whispers filled the air. Cameras lifted discreetly. Edward turned toward Ariana. "You did this, didn't you? You and your little sob story." Ariana met his glare with quiet dignity. "No, Mr. Langston, your actions did this." He froze for a heartbeat, searching for a retort. None came. When he stood, his voice cracked into something smaller than arrogance, something close to disbelief. "This is insane. I didn't mean," but the officer's hand rested lightly on his arm. "Meaning doesn't erase responsibility." Mia stepped back, watching as Edward was escorted down the aisle. For a brief second, he looked back not at Ariana, but at the faces turned toward him, unflinching, disapproving. He realized, perhaps for the first time, what it felt like to be seen without control. The door closed behind him. Silence filled the void he left behind. Captain Rivera came over the intercom one final time. "Thank you for your cooperation, everyone. Please remain seated until clearance is given." Ariana leaned back, exhaling a long breath she hadn't realized she'd been holding. The air felt lighter now, easier to breathe. Mia approached quietly, her voice warm. "He's gone." "Yes," Ariana said, "but what matters is what comes next." Mia nodded. "You think there'll be press?" "Probably," Ariana said, smiling faintly, "but maybe that's okay. Some stories deserve to be told in the daylight." Outside, the morning sun washed over the tarmac. For the first time since takeoff, Ariana felt weightless, not because she was above the clouds, but because she'd stood her ground and the sky had listened. The cabin remained hushed long after Edward Langston was escorted away. The metallic click of the aircraft door closing echoed like punctuation at the end of a sentence everyone had been waiting to finish. The passengers shifted slowly, as if unsure how to behave after witnessing something raw and irreversible. Ariana Cole sat still, the morning light washing over her face through the window. The adrenaline that had kept her steady now began to ebb, leaving behind an ache deep in her chest, not of fear, but of release. Mia Tran knelt beside her seat, voice low. "You okay?" Ariana nodded, her tone calm but weary. "I think so. I just didn't expect it to end like that." Mia gave a small smile. "It didn't end. It started. What he did won't stay in the dark now." Ariana's gaze drifted toward the tarmac where the officers led Edward across the concrete. He looked smaller there, his shoulders slumped, his defiance gone. The morning sun caught the polished badge on the lead officer's chest. The light flashed once, bright and fleeting, like justice itself catching up. Inside, Captain Rivera appeared at the front of the cabin. His presence was calm but commanding, the kind of authority that didn't need volume to be felt. "Ladies and gentlemen," he announced, "thank you for your cooperation. We'll begin taxiing to the terminal shortly. Please remain seated while we complete required documentation." A quiet wave of compliance swept through the passengers. As he turned to leave, Rivera stopped by Ariana's seat. "Ms. Cole, FIA representatives will want a statement once we disembark. I'll make sure you have privacy." "I appreciate that," she replied. He gave a respectful nod, his eyes steady. "You handled yourself with grace. Not everyone could have done that." Ariana's lips curved faintly. Sometimes grace is the only armor left. When he walked away, she leaned her head back against the seat. Eyes half closed, the hum of the engines had softened to a low purr. Beneath it, she could still hear the whisper of voices around her passengers quietly processing what they'd witnessed. A woman across the aisle leaned over and said gently, "You were incredible." Ariana opened her eyes, a bit surprised. "I just did what anyone should." The woman shook her head. "No, you did what most people wouldn't." Ariana didn't reply, but the words settled deep within her. Moments later, the jet bridge connected with a dull clunk. The cabin lights brightened fully, and passengers began gathering their belongings. Mia helped Ariana up, careful to avoid brushing the tender spot on her leg. "Let me walk you to the terminal," she offered. "Thank you, but I'll be fine," Ariana said softly. "You've done more than enough." Mia hesitated. "Then, at least, promise me you'll get that looked at." Ariana smiled. "Promise." They exchanged a small nod, the kind shared by two people who had seen each other at their most human. When Ariana stepped into the jet bridge, the cool air met her like a reset. The hum of the engines faded behind her, replaced by the soft beeps and murmurs of airport life. Waiting near the gate were two FAA agents in dark suits, and standing just behind them, a familiar figure, her father. Douglas Cole looked exactly as she remembered, silver hair cropped close, posture straight, eyes sharp but kind. The moment their eyes met, Ariana felt the tightness in her chest loosen. She hadn't realized how much she'd needed that one look. He approached quickly, his voice low but full of warmth. "You all right, I am," she said. "It's just a burn. Nothing serious." He studied her face for a long moment, reading the exhaustion beneath her composure. "You didn't let it break you," he said finally. "No," she replied, "but it almost did." Douglas turned to the agents. "We'll give our statement privately." They nodded and led them to a quiet office off the terminal corridor. Inside, fluorescent lights buzzed overhead, and the faint scent of coffee lingered, a cruel reminder of how the whole nightmare had begun. The lead agent began. "Ms. Cole, we've reviewed the captain's report and confirmed several passenger testimonies. Mr. Langston's behavior will be referred to federal court under Title 49, Section 46504, interference and assault aboard an aircraft." Ariana nodded slowly. "I don't want vengeance. I just want accountability. That's exactly what this is," the agent said. "Justice, not vengeance." Douglas folded his arms, watching quietly, his presence grounding her like an anchor. When the agents left to finalize paperwork, he turned to her. "You did everything right." She exhaled. It didn't feel right at the time. It felt heavy, lonely. "That's how truth feels before it lands," he said gently. "But it landed, didn't it?" She smiled faintly, tears threatening to rise. "You always have a line for everything." He chuckled. Wisdom sounds rehearsed when you've lived long enough to repeat it. They both laughed, quietly, soft, tired laughter, the kind that comes after surviving something you didn't ask for. Minutes later, an airport representative entered with a tablet. Ms. Cole, your name's trending online. Someone posted a video of the incident. It's everywhere. People are calling it coffee in first class. Ariana blinked. Oh no. Douglas arched an eyebrow. Oh yes. The representative continued. There's an overwhelming wave of support. Hashtags like Raw Respect in Flight and Raw Stand with Ariana are circulating. The airline's issuing a statement as we speak. Ariana rubbed her temples. I didn't want this kind of attention. Her father's voice softened. You didn't seek it, but maybe the world needed to see it. She glanced at him, thoughtful. You think this will change anything? Change starts with seeing, he said simply, and you just made the world look up. Outside the office window, the day had brightened into full morning. Planes rolled down distant runways, each one a silver shape against the pale blue. For the first time in hours, Ariana felt steady. Not triumphant, just steady. She stood, gathering her things. I have a board meeting tomorrow. I should probably prepare. Douglas smiled, proud, still working, even after turbulence. That's what we do, isn't it, she said. We keep moving forward. He reached out, placing a hand gently over hers. You moved more than forward today. Ari, you lifted others with you. As they walked out of the terminal together, a few travelers recognized her from the viral clip. Some smiled. One woman whispered, "Thank you," as she passed. Ariana didn't respond, but she met each gaze with quiet acknowledgement, not as a symbol, but as a person, a reminder that dignity, once claimed, can't be taken back. The sun was higher now, flooding the glass walls with gold. For a moment, Ariana stopped and looked at the sky, the same vast blue that had carried her through humiliation, through silence, and finally through truth. It looked peaceful again. Her father followed her gaze. Ready to go home? She nodded. Yeah, but something tells me this story isn't done yet. Douglas smiled knowingly. Stories like this never end. They just keep teaching. Ariana slipped on her sunglasses, the reflection of the tarmac bright in the lenses. Then, let's make sure this one teaches the right lesson. They stepped into the sunlight together, the terminal doors sliding open behind them with a soft hiss, as if even the world itself was exhaling in relief. The morning after the flight, the world had already changed. Ariana Cole woke to the glow of her phone screen lighting up the hotel room in downtown San Francisco. The notifications were endless, hundreds of messages, thousands of mentions. The headline from a major news outlet flashed across every feed: Coffee and first-class CEO targeted mid-flight in shocking racist incident. Ariana stared at it for a long moment. Her heart beat slow but heavy. She hadn't spoken publicly yet. She hadn't even processed what had happened. But now, the entire nation was talking for her. The morning light streamed through sheer curtains, painting the room in gold. On the nightstand, a half-drunk glass of water and her father's old aviation badge lay side by side. She picked it up, tracing her thumb along the edge. The metal was cool, steady, just like him. Her phone buzzed again. It was a text from Douglas Cole. I saw the coverage. Don't rush to speak. Let truth breathe first. She smiled faintly. That was his way of saying, don't defend yourself against noise. Let integrity do the talking. Still, The pressure mounted. A dozen reporters had called. 2 morning shows had requested interviews. EduBridge's PR director had left 5 voicemails asking how to respond. Ariana exhaled deeply and swung her legs off the bed. The burn on her thigh had faded into a dull ache, but when she looked at the faint mark, she saw more than pain. It had become a symbol, a scar born of arrogance, now turned into something that would demand accountability. After dressing in a simple navy blouse and jeans, she opened her laptop. Her inbox was flooded emails from supporters, victims of discrimination, and even airline employees thanking her for standing up. One message caught her attention. The subject line read, "From someone who saw everything." It was from a passenger on the flight, Ms. Cole. I was in row 4. I didn't know what to say then, but I want to say it now. You handled yourself with more dignity than anyone should have to muster in the face of that kind of cruelty. I hope you know it mattered. She felt her eyes sting, a slow, warm ache at the corner of her lids. For the first time since the plane touched down, she allowed herself to feel the weight not just of the humiliation, but of the humanity that had followed. Her phone buzzed again, another call, this one from an unfamiliar number. She hesitated, then answered. "Ms. Cole." The voice was low, careful. "This is Special Agent Ruiz, FAA Division of Passenger Affairs. We're handling the formal investigation." "Yes, Agent Ruiz," she said, her tone professional. "We've received video recordings from several passengers. They clearly corroborate your account. Mr. Langston has been charged with in-flight assault and discriminatory harassment under federal law." Ariana closed her eyes briefly. "I understand. There will be hearings, media coverage, possibly court appearances. We'll keep you informed. Thank you," she said softly. After the call, she sat in silence for several minutes. The hum of traffic outside filled the quiet. Below her window, the city moved as if nothing monumental had happened. People with coffee cups and briefcases, morning joggers, delivery vans. Life went on, but her life was now split in 2 before the flight and after the flight. A knock sounded at the door. She opened it to find Mia Tran standing there, holding 2 paper cups of coffee. Mia Ariana blinked, surprised. "How did you—" "The airline gave me your hotel info," Mia said, shyly smiling. "I'm off duty today. I thought, maybe we could talk, if that's okay." Ariana stepped aside. "Of course. Please, come in." They sat by the window, the city stretching endlessly beyond them. Mia handed her a cup. "Black, no sugar, I remember." Ariana laughed softly. Brave choice, considering the history. Mia's smile faded. "I still can't believe he did that. I keep replaying it in my head. I should have done more." "You did enough," Ariana said firmly. "You spoke up. That matters." Mia looked down, fiddling with the cardboard sleeve around her cup. "You know, after they took him off the plane, one of the other passengers came up to me and said, 'You girls handled that better than anyone else could have.' And I thought, why did he say girls? Why not women? Even when they're praising us, they make us small." Ariana nodded, her gaze thoughtful. Because respect is still something people think they get to distribute like a privilege. But it isn't. It's a birthright. They sat in silence, sipping coffee that was finally just coffee, no symbol, no threat. Then Mia asked, almost in a whisper, "Do you think he'll ever understand what he did?" Ariana thought about that for a long moment. "Understanding isn't the same as regret," she said finally. "He might never feel the weight of it the way we do, but the world around him will, and maybe that's where change begins. Mia nodded slowly. You're stronger than you look. Ariana smiled. So are you. When Mia left, Ariana stood by the window again, looking at the sky. The same sky that had held her in fear just 24 hours earlier, now stretched wide and forgiving. It struck her how something so vast could hold both cruelty and redemption within the same horizon. Her phone rang again. This time it was Douglas Cole. "Morning, sweetheart," his warm, gravelly voice said. "You holding up, I'm managing," she replied. "There's a lot happening online. I've seen it. You're trending higher than the president," he said, half amused. She chuckled softly. "That's not necessarily a good thing." "It might be," he said. "People are listening. You've opened a door. Just make sure what walks through it is truth, not noise." "I'll be careful," she promised. "Good," he said, "because the sky might have carried the story. But now it's your voice that'll make it matter." She felt the familiar steadiness his words always gave her. "I love you, Dad. I love you too, kiddo. Always proud of you, especially today." When the call ended, Ariana opened her laptop again. She began drafting a statement, simple, human, unfiltered. "I didn't ask for this story, but it found me. What happened on that flight wasn't about coffee. It was about dignity. And if telling it helps even one person feel seen, then maybe something good can come from it. No one should have to earn respect. It's not a reward. It's our shared responsibility." She read it aloud once, the words quiet but powerful in the morning stillness. Outside, the sunlight caught the wing of a plane taking off in the distance. She followed it with her eyes until it disappeared into the blue, leaving only contrails behind white lines across the sky, proof that something had passed through and changed it. Ariana took a slow breath, then hit post. Her story, finally, was in her own hands. By the end of that week, the story had exploded across every platform imaginable. News anchors debated it, commentators dissected it, and talk shows replayed the footage until it no longer felt real. Every outlet had a version of the same headline. When prejudice spilled mid-flight, Ariana Cole, once known in the business world for her innovations in education technology, was now being called a symbol of dignity under fire. It wasn't a title she had ever wanted. She sat in her office at EduBridge headquarters in San Francisco, overlooking the skyline where fog met steel. The morning had been relentless calls from journalists, statements from advocacy groups, messages from former classmates she hadn't spoken to in years. Some wanted to praise her, others wanted a quote, a few wanted to turn her pain into a soundbite. Her assistant, Naomi, entered quietly, carrying a tablet. "Ms. Cole, CNN just confirmed the hearing date for Edward Langston. They're saying it'll be open to media coverage." Ariana sighed. "Of course it will." Naomi hesitated. "Do you want to release another statement?" Before then, Ariana shook her head. "No more statements." "Not yet." She turned toward the window again. The fog outside pressed gently against the glass, blurring the outlines of the city. For a fleeting moment, it reminded her of that morning on the plane, how the world could feel both so vast and so small at once. Her father had called earlier that morning, reminding her to stay grounded. "The real trial isn't in the courtroom, Ari," he'd said. "It's in how you carry yourself through it." She repeated those words silently now, like a mantra. Across town, a very different scene was unfolding. Edward Langston sat in a hotel conference room surrounded by his legal team. His once tailored confidence had begun to fray at the edges. The news cycle had been merciless. His company had suspended him indefinitely. A major client had issued a public statement condemning his conduct unbecoming of a professional. He paced the floor as his lawyer, a sleek man in a charcoal suit, spoke firmly. "You need to show remorse, Edward. Genuine remorse." "I didn't assault anyone," Edward snapped. "It was an accident. I've said that 100 times. His lawyer exhaled, clearly tired of this dance. Intent doesn't erase perception. People saw what they saw. Edward sank into a chair, rubbing his temples. "She's milking this," he muttered, turning a misunderstanding into some kind of civil rights movement. The lawyer studied him for a long, silent moment. "Do you hear yourself? That's the same arrogance that got you here." Edward looked up, startled. "Excuse me, do you want to win sympathy, or do you want to keep proving her right?" The lawyer said, voice low but sharp, "Because right now, you sound exactly like the man they think you are." For a moment, Edward said nothing. The words hit harder than he expected. When the lawyer left, the room fell quiet. The city sounds outside were muffled, far away. Edward stared at his reflection in the window, the same face, the same eyes, but something in them looked smaller now. At that same hour, Ariana sat in a meeting room across from Mia Tran, who had come to discuss her official statement for the FAA's case file. Mia wore her airline uniform, though her flight schedule had been temporarily reduced for the investigation. "I've written what I saw," Mia said, sliding a typed report across the table. "I didn't hold back." Ariana glanced through the document. It was detailed, professional, and honest. The words painted a clear picture not just of the incident, but of the humanity behind it. "You're brave, Mia," Ariana said softly. Mia smiled. "You showed me how to be." A brief silence settled between them, filled with mutual respect. Then Mia asked, "How do you do it? Stay calm when everyone's watching." Ariana's answer came slowly. "Because I know what they're really watching for. Not my reaction, but my restraint." Mia nodded, understanding more than most ever would. That's a heavy thing to carry. Ariana's lips curved faintly. "It is, but sometimes it's also the thing that changes people." That night, Ariana drove to her father's house in Marin County. The drive wound through misty hills, the city lights fading behind her. Douglas Cole was waiting on the porch, 2 mugs of tea in hand. "Late-night visitor," he said, smiling. "I needed quiet," she replied, sinking into the porch chair beside him. They sat in silence for a while, the sound of crickets and the faint hum of the distant highway between them. "Finally," he said, "you did the right thing." "You know, I didn't feel right," Ariana admitted. "It felt like surviving, not winning." He nodded. "Surviving is its own kind of victory. You showed restraint when you could have shown rage. You gave the world an image of what dignity looks like under pressure." Ariana stared into her tea. "But will it matter, Dad? Will it really change anyone?" he thought for a long moment. "Not everyone, but maybe someone who needed to see that justice isn't loud, it's steady." Ariana looked out over the dark hills, feeling the quiet power in his words. The next morning, the news broke that Edward Langston had agreed to a plea hearing instead of a drawn-out trial. The decision stunned everyone. It wasn't an admission of guilt, but it was close. When asked by reporters for a statement, Ariana declined interviews, instead issuing a single sentence through Idubridge's public channel, "Let accountability be louder than anger." The sentence spread instantly. It was quoted on television, printed on headlines, and reposted thousands of times. In a downtown cafe, a group of college students discussed it over breakfast. She could have ruined him publicly. One said, instead, she just let truth do the work. Another replied, that's what makes her dangerous in the best way. Meanwhile, at his hotel, Edward sat watching the coverage, jaw clenched, but beneath the frustration, a new sensation was beginning to settle. It wasn't anger, it was recognition of how easily he had mistaken privilege for immunity. For the first time in days, he didn't reach for excuses. He simply turned off the television and sat in silence. Across the city, Ariana walked through her office lobby, employees pausing to greet her with quiet admiration. She didn't smile much that day, but her eyes carried the calm of someone who had weathered a storm and found meaning in the wreckage. As she entered her office, she paused by the window. Outside, planes lifted into the sky, one after another, engines roaring against the soft blue. She whispered to herself, even storms clear, eventually. And for the first time since that flight, she believed it. The weeks that followed were a blur of noise. Everywhere Ariana Cole went, her name followed her. In headlines, on talk shows, in op-eds written by strangers who claimed to understand her pain. Some called her a hero. Others accused her of exploiting an overreaction culture. She tried to tune it all out, but it was like standing in the middle of a storm that refused to pass. Her phone never stopped buzzing. Every ping was either praise or provocation. She had to mute half the notifications just to think. Yet, amid the chaos, she found quiet moments, early mornings when the city was still asleep and she'd walk along the waterfront with a cup of coffee. The smell of salt and wind steadied her. She liked those hours when no one knew her name, when she could just be a person again. One morning, as she stood watching the seagulls circle over the bay, her father joined her. Douglas Cole walked slowly, hands in the pockets of his overcoat, his expression unreadable. "Hard to find peace when the world keeps talking about you," he said. Ariana half smiled. "You sound like someone who's been there before." He shrugged. "Leadership is a noisy place. People will always talk louder when they don't understand quiet strength." She sipped her coffee, the wind tugging gently at her coat. "It's strange, Dad. I didn't want to become a symbol. I just wanted to get home that day." He turned to look at her. Symbols aren't chosen. They're born in moments when ordinary people refuse to shrink. Ariana stared out at the water. "It doesn't feel heroic. It feels heavy." "That's because it's real," he said simply, "and real things always carry weight." That night, while she worked late in her office, Naomi entered with a hesitant knock. "Ms. Cole, you might want to see this." She handed Ariana a tablet showing a breaking news alert. Edward Langston issues first public apology. Ariana frowned. She clicked play. On the screen, Edward appeared behind a podium, thinner, pale, wearing a simple suit. Reporters' microphones crowded in front of him. His voice trembled slightly as he began. "I want to acknowledge my actions on Flight 273, he said, reading from a page. "What I did was inexcusable. My anger and prejudice hurt someone who deserved respect, not cruelty. I can't undo it, but I can accept responsibility." He paused, swallowing hard. "I've lost much since that day, my position, my reputation, and the illusion that I was a good man. I see now that what I called a mistake was really a mirror, and I didn't like what I saw. The room was silent except for the clicks of cameras. Ariana sat frozen, unsure how to feel. The words sounded practiced, but there was something raw beneath them, an exhaustion that came from more than humiliation. Naomi broke the silence. "Do you believe him?" Ariana exhaled slowly. "I'm not sure it matters. Maybe it's not about believing him. It's about him finally believing himself." Later that evening, she closed her laptop and stood at the window. Below, the city lights shimmered across the glass towers like scattered constellations. Her reflection looked back at her stronger, older somehow. She thought about the passengers who had spoken up, about Mia, about the pilot who had followed every procedure perfectly. Justice wasn't one person's act, she realized. It was a chorus of decency, each voice choosing not to look away. Across town, Edward sat alone in his apartment, the echo of applause from his press conference still ringing faintly in his ears. It wasn't applause for him, more like acknowledgement that he had finally faced what he'd tried to outrun. He looked around the dimly lit room, half-packed boxes, a stack of legal documents, a single framed photo of his daughter, now estranged. He picked up the picture and whispered, "I wish I'd been better." No cameras, no audience this time, just a man confronting his silence. Meanwhile, Ariana received a message from Mia. "I'm flying to D.C. next week for training. I'd love to see you before I go." Ariana smiled softly and replied, "Of course, let's meet somewhere quiet. No cameras." They met the next evening at a small cafe tucked away on a side street. The lights were warm and the scent of cinnamon lingered in the air. Mia arrived first, waving from a corner booth. "Feels good to be off a plane for once," she said with a laugh. Ariana chuckled. "I bet. How are you holding up better?" Mia said, stirring her drink. "After everything, I realized how many people just needed to see someone stand up. It made them feel less alone." Ariana nodded. "That's the strange part about all this. Something terrible happens, and somehow it reminds people they're not powerless." Mia looked thoughtful. "Maybe that's what courage really is. It's contagious." They talked for hours about life, work, and how the world had changed around them. When they finally stepped outside, the night was crisp and quiet. As they said goodbye, Mia paused. "You know, I think about that moment on the plane a lot. How you looked at him not with hate, but with this calm certainty. It stayed with me." Ariana smiled faintly. "That wasn't calm. That was control. I was terrified." "Maybe," Mia said, "but sometimes courage and fear look the same from the outside." They hugged briefly before parting. Back home, Ariana found her father waiting in the kitchen, reading an article on his tablet. He looked up as she entered. "You saw Langston's apology I did. What did you think she took a moment before answering? I think the world might remember his regret longer than his arrogance." Douglas nodded. "That's redemption's quiet trick. It never erases what happened, but it teaches the rest of us how not to repeat it." He poured her a cup of tea. "And what about you, Ari? What will you do now that the noise is fading?" She smiled softly. "Maybe I'll do what I was always meant to build, teach, lead, but this time I'll add one more thing." "What's that?" he asked. "Listen," she said, "to the one still afraid to speak." He studied her face, pride warming his eyes. "That's my girl." Later that night, as she prepared for bed, Ariana checked her messages one last time. A single email caught her attention. It was from an anonymous address. "I don't expect forgiveness, but thank you for handling my worst moment with more grace than I ever deserved." E.L. Ariana stared at the screen, her breath catching. There was no anger in her response, only a strange peace. She typed 2 words before closing her laptop. "I hope you change." Then she turned off the light. Outside, the sky was deep and quiet, the city asleep beneath it. Somewhere above, a plane crossed the night, its lights blinking softly against the darkness, reminding her that even after turbulence, flight always finds its rhythm again. A month had passed since the apology. The world had already begun to move on. The news cycle spun toward the next outrage, the next headline, the next story to consume. But for Ariana Cole, time hadn't dulled the echoes of what had happened, it had simply deepened their meaning. Her company, EduBridge, was thriving again. Meetings resumed, investors reappeared, and her team looked at her with quiet admiration. Yet, beneath the hum of business as usual, there lingered a shift. People listened differently now. They paused before they spoke. They asked before they assumed. That, Ariana thought, was the smallest seed of change and maybe the most important. One Tuesday morning, while reviewing proposals in her glass-walled office, Naomi entered with a puzzled look. "This came for you, Ms. Cole. No return address." She handed Ariana a thick cream envelope, sealed with a faint smudge of ink where a trembling hand had written her name. Ariana turned it over, curiosity rising. The handwriting was neat but uncertain formal, almost old-fashioned. She unfolded it carefully. Inside was a handwritten letter. "Ms. Cole, I doubt I have any right to your time, but I owe you words that go beyond the stage and the cameras. The apology I gave the world was for them. This one is for you. Since that day, I've lost everything I thought made me who I was, my job, my friends, the illusion of decency I hid behind. At first, I blamed you. I told myself you had destroyed me. But the truth is, I destroyed myself long before that flight ever took off. You gave me something I never gave anyone else: silence. You didn't shout. You didn't humiliate me back. You let the truth speak, and that silence haunted me. I've been in therapy. I've joined a restorative justice program. I sit with people who look at me like I'm everything wrong with the world, and for the first time, I listen instead of defending. I don't expect forgiveness. I just wanted you to know I'm trying to change, not to be seen as better, but to be better. Respectfully, Edward Langston." Ariana sat back, reading the words twice, maybe 3 times. The pen marks were uneven, the ink darker where his hand had pressed too hard. It wasn't a perfect letter, but it was honest. And in that imperfection, she found something unexpected: humanity. She stared out the window, the San Francisco skyline glinting beneath morning light. She remembered his eyes on that plane, cold, dismissive, full of the arrogance that had burned like acid. To think that the same eyes might now hold remorse was almost impossible. Yet, here it was proof that shame could turn into reflection if someone let the silence reach deep enough. Later that evening, she called her father. "Dad, I got a letter." Douglas's tone was steady. "From him, yes. It's not what I expected." He waited a moment before replying. "How does it make you feel?" She hesitated, conflicted, angry, but also relieved. He chuckled softly. "You don't have to decide which one it is." Healing doesn't follow a script. I don't want to forgive him, she said quietly, but I don't want to hate him anymore either. That's not weakness, Ari, Douglas said. That's the space between justice and mercy, the place where growth begins. She smiled faintly. You always know what to say. That's because I've been wrong enough times to know what not to say, he replied. They both laughed, the tension easing like a door opening. The next morning, Ariana printed Edward's letter and slipped it into a folder. She brought it with her to a conference in Washington, D.C., where she was scheduled to speak on diversity and leadership. As she walked onto the stage, the crowd of executives, students, and journalists fell silent. Her name had become synonymous with grace under fire, but she didn't want to be a symbol anymore. She wanted to be real. Good afternoon, she began. I want to talk about something uncomfortable, what happens after the apology. A hush fell. When someone harms you publicly, the world expects you to either forgive them or destroy them, but most of us live somewhere in between those choices. We carry anger and empathy in the same breath. She paused, scanning the room. I received a letter recently from the man who poured coffee on me mid-flight. He didn't ask for forgiveness. He asked to be seen as capable of change. And I realized that's what this conversation is really about. Not perfection, but possibility. A ripple of emotion passed through the crowd. Ariana held up the folded paper gently. I'm not sharing this to redeem him. I'm sharing it to remind us that humanity doesn't end at our mistakes. It begins when we face them. For a moment, the room was utterly silent. Then, soft applause began, building into a quiet standing ovation. Not the thunderous kind, but the sincere, reflective kind that comes from people who feel the truth sink deep. When she stepped off stage, Mia Tran was waiting in the wings. She had flown in on a layover just to see Ariana speak. Her eyes shimmered with pride. You did it, Mia whispered. Ariana smiled. I didn't do anything. I just told the truth. Sometimes, Mia said softly. That's the hardest thing. They walked out together into the crisp afternoon light. Reporters waited by the steps, but Ariana didn't stop for interviews. Instead, she and Mia found a small bench under a cherry blossom tree nearby. The petals fell in soft spirals, catching on Ariana's jacket. I used to think justice was about punishment, Ariana said quietly. Now I think it's about acknowledgement, seeing the pain, naming it, and still believing we can be better. Mia nodded, her gaze distant. You turned something cruel into something healing. Ariana shook her head. No, the world did. I just didn't let it end in hate. Back in her hotel room that night, Ariana took out the letter once more. She read the closing line again. I'm trying to change. She found herself whispering to the empty room. Then, I hope you make it. Setting the letter down, she opened her journal and wrote a final entry for the day. Healing isn't a destination. It's a conversation, the kind that keeps echoing long after the noise fades. Outside, the night deepened over Washington. Airplanes glided soundlessly overhead, lights blinking across the dark sky. Ariana watched one rise, steady and luminous, until it disappeared into the clouds. Somewhere in that endless blue, she imagined forgiveness floating not as a surrender, but as release. For the first time in months, she felt light enough to breathe freely again. Spring arrived with a softness that felt almost like mercy. The cherry blossoms outside Ariana Cole's apartment drifted through the air in slow spirals. settling on sidewalks and car hoods like confetti from an invisible celebration. Yet, inside her home, everything remained still quiet in that way that only follows after months of chaos. It had been 4 months since the letter. 4 months since she'd stood on that stage in Washington and reminded a crowd that redemption isn't about forgetting, but about choosing to face oneself. The storm had passed. Mostly, news coverage had slowed. Commentators had found new controversies. Life, in its stubbornness, had moved on. But Ariana hadn't. Not entirely. Some nights, she still woke with the faint sound of shattering ceramic echoing in her memory, the sound of the cup hitting the cabin floor, coffee splattering across her dress, the sting on her leg. It wasn't trauma anymore, not exactly. It was something quieter, like a scar that still pulsed when the weather changed. One evening, she sat by her window, laptop open, drafting a speech for an education summit in Atlanta. Her father called, as he did every Sunday night. How's my world changer Douglas's familiar voice came through, full of that calm pride she'd grown up on. Ariana smiled, trying to sound wise for a room full of people who probably already know more than I do. Wisdom isn't about knowing more, he said. It's about remembering what matters when others forget. She chuckled. You and your porch swing philosophy. Hey, it got you this far, he teased. Then, more gently. You've been quiet lately. Are you still thinking about him? Ariana paused. Sometimes, not about what he did, but what it means that he's trying. Douglas's voice softened. That's growth. Ari, you don't carry hate anymore. That's how you win. She stared out the window at the city lights flickering in the distance. I don't know if winning is the word, she said. Maybe it's just peace. He hummed in approval. Peace is rarer than victory, sweetheart. Hold on to it. A few days later, an invitation arrived in her inbox. It was from the FAA's Diversity and Ethics Division. They were hosting a closed panel event in the Chicago Restorative Dialogue in Modern Aviation. Ariana skimmed the details until one line made her heart skip. Panelists: Edward Langston, former consultant, reformed advocate for workplace equality. Her hand froze on the trackpad. For several long seconds, she just stared at the screen. The idea of being in the same room as him again sent a chill through her chest. And yet, beneath the hesitation, there was something else: curiosity. After an hour of pacing, she wrote back simply, "Confirmed. See you there." The conference took place in a quiet hall at the Hyatt Regency near O'Hare Airport. The audience was small, no cameras, no press, just professionals, educators, and policy advisors. The air hummed with low conversation. Ariana arrived early, calm but alert. She wore a dark emerald suit, her hair tied neatly, her expression unreadable. As she took her seat on the stage, she could feel eyes turned toward her. Then he walked in. Edward Langston looked older, thinner. His once slicked hair had gone salt and pepper gray, and his posture, once puffed with arrogance, carried something humbled. He spotted Ariana across the stage and paused. Their eyes met briefly, just long enough for acknowledgement, not yet forgiveness. When it was his turn to speak, Edward stood slowly, paper trembling slightly in his hand. I used to think silence was strength, he began, that staying quiet about my bias, my anger, meant I had control, but silence only protects the lie. He glanced at Ariana briefly before continuing. When I poured that coffee, I wasn't reacting to an accident. I was reacting to everything ugly inside me that I'd refused to confront. And he nodded toward her, chose not to return that ugliness. That moment broke me, but it also started me. The room was utterly still. Edward swallowed hard, voice low. I don't deserve applause. I don't even deserve comfort. But I can say this: the person I was on that flight doesn't exist anymore. I buried him in the wreckage of his own arrogance. When he sat down, there was no applause, just an air of solemn understanding. Then Ariana rose. Her voice was even, her tone deliberate. We talk about accountability like it's a verdict, but sometimes it's a journey. I've seen that journey change people, and I've seen it break them. Today, I saw what it looks like when someone chooses to rebuild. She turned slightly toward him, her gaze steady. I accept your apology, Mr. Langston, not because it erases what happened, but because holding on to anger would only chain us both to that flight forever. A faint murmur rippled through the room. Edward's eyes glistened not with relief, but with something deeper gratitude. After the panel ended, Ariana stepped outside to the courtyard for air. The wind carried the scent of rain. Moments later, she heard footsteps behind her. Edward approached, cautious. Ms. Cole. She turned. Mr. Langston. I didn't expect you to come, he said quietly. I didn't expect you to invite truth into your life, she replied. But here we are. He smiled faintly. I'm volunteering now, working with outreach programs for displaced workers, mentoring young men about bias and respect. It's not redemption, it's just responsibility. That's a good place to start, she said. He nodded slowly. You taught me something I didn't understand before, that grace isn't weakness. And humility, she said gently, isn't humiliation. For a brief moment, the tension that had defined them melted. They stood as two human beings, not offender and victim, but teacher and learner. As he left, Ariana whispered to herself, maybe that's what healing really sounds like. Quiet, steady, without applause. Later that night, she met her father for dinner. Douglas listened as she recounted the day. When she finished, he leaned back in his chair, eyes thoughtful. You did more than forgive, he said. You made room for change. Ariana smiled faintly. It doesn't mean forgetting, of course not. Douglas said, it means remembering differently. They toasted softly her water glass to his iced tea. As they left the restaurant, Ariana looked up at the night sky. A plane roared overhead, lights blinking against the darkness. For the first time since that terrible day, the sound didn't make her flinch, it made her smile. 6 months later, the city felt alive again, clean air after a long storm. For Ariana Cole, every dawn felt like a chance to breathe a little deeper, to live without the constant noise of judgment or fame. The world had learned her story, debated it, praised it, and then finally let it rest. Now, she was ready to write a new chapter. EduBridge had grown faster than she imagined. Under her leadership, it became one of the most respected educational networks in the country, helping thousands of underprivileged students earn scholarships and access digital learning. But beyond success, Ariana found purpose quiet, meaningful purpose. She'd begun volunteering at a youth mentorship program in Oakland, speaking to teens about resilience, respect, and identity. The first time she shared her story, she'd expected pity. Instead, she found connection. One young girl, barely 16, raised her hand after Ariana finished and said softly, You made me believe I can stand up for myself and still be kind." Those words stayed with her for weeks. One morning, while she reviewed upcoming grant proposals in her office, Naomi knocked gently. "There's someone here to see you. Ms. Cole." He said he's an old acquaintance. Ariana looked up, an acquaintance before Naomi could answer. A familiar voice came from the doorway. I hope I still qualify as that. It was Edward Langston. He looked different again, healthier, calmer, wearing a modest gray suit and no tie. His posture had changed too, no longer defensive, just open. Ariana blinked in surprise. "Edward, I wasn't expecting." "I know," he said gently. "I should have written first. But I'm in the Bay Area for a workshop at the University of San Francisco, and I wanted to see you if that's all right." She studied him for a moment, then gestured to a chair. "Please, sit." He did, folding his hands on his lap. For a moment, neither spoke. Then he said, "I've been working with an organization that helps men unpack racial bias. I'm mentor now. It's not redemption, but it's something honest." Ariana nodded. "That's good work, important work." He exhaled softly. "You taught me that silence is complicity. I've spent most of my life avoiding uncomfortable truths. Now I walk toward them." There was sincerity in his tone, not the performative kind she'd seen before, but quiet, lived sincerity. Ariana leaned back, thoughtful. "People ask me all the time if forgiveness changes anything. I used to say it was just about letting go, but I've realized it also gives the other person space to change." Edward's gaze met hers. Steady. "And I'll spend the rest of my life trying to be worthy of that space." A gentle silence filled the room. Then, with a faint smile, he handed her an envelope. "This isn't another letter. It's something I wanted you to see." She opened it. Inside was a photograph, a small group of men and women standing in a community center, holding certificates, in the back row. Edward stood beside them, his hand resting on the shoulder of a young man with a hesitant smile. "These are my students," he explained. "Every week we sit and talk about race, responsibility, respect. The young man next to me used to say he didn't believe people could change. Last week, he said he wasn't so sure anymore." Ariana looked at the photo for a long moment. Then she smiled a real, unguarded smile. "You're teaching now," she said. "I'm learning," Edward replied softly. "Every day." Before leaving, he said quietly, "Thank you for not defining me by my worst moment." Ariana's response came with grace. "You defined yourself beyond it. That's the part I respect." When he was gone, she stood at the window, holding the photograph. The skyline shimmered in the distance, and for the first time, she realized how far both of them had come. That evening, she met her father for dinner by the bay. Douglas listened intently as she told him about the visit. "He's doing good work." "Dad," she said, "real work. Maybe he found what he was meant to learn from all this." Douglas nodded slowly. "Sometimes pain's the only teacher that sticks." They ate quietly for a while, the gentle clinking of cutlery blending with the sound of waves outside. Then Douglas asked, "And you? What did you find?" Ariana looked up, her eyes thoughtful. "I found that justice and grace don't cancel each other out. They build something new when they meet." He smiled, pride glowing behind his tired eyes. "That's something this world needs to hear more often." The next morning, Ariana received an email from Mia Tran. Subject: Big news. "Hey, Ari." Guess what? I got promoted to head of in-flight training. They're putting me in charge of diversity and sensitivity education for new crew members. I wanted to thank you. You gave me courage when I needed it most. Turns out that flight changed my life too. P.S. If you ever fly with us again, I promise all the coffee will stay exactly where it belongs." Ariana laughed out loud, her heart warm. She typed back quickly, "Congratulations, Mia. You earned every bit of that. I'll take that coffee with extra cream this time." That afternoon, she stood before her team at EduBridge, preparing to announce a new initiative, the Bridge Forward Program, a mentorship network connecting executives with underrepresented youth. Her opening words were calm but filled with conviction. "We've all experienced turbulence," she began, smiling slightly at the word, "but sometimes turbulence just means the air is changing. Growth feels like that too." The room quieted. Every person here has the power to make another feel seen, respected, and capable. That's how we build a better world, not through perfection, but persistence. Applause filled the room. Later, after everyone left, Ariana walked to the rooftop terrace. The wind was cool, and the late sun cast long golden shadows across the city. A plane streaked overhead, gleaming white against the fading blue. She followed it with her eyes until it disappeared beyond the clouds, a small smile curving on her lips. In that moment, she felt something she hadn't in a long time, not triumph, not even relief, but peace. The sky was wide open again, and she knew, deep down, that everything, every scar, every moment of stillness, every act of grace had been worth it. This story reminds us that true strength isn't found in shouting the loudest, it's found in staying composed when dignity is tested. Ariana Cole didn't answer hate with fury. She answered it with grace, proof that restraint can be its own form of power. Through her calm, she forced the world to look deeper beyond race, beyond pride, to see the quiet courage of someone who chose compassion over revenge. For older audiences, this lesson feels timeless. Respect, integrity, and forgiveness don't age. Life will always test us with moments where we can humiliate or heal, curse or correct. The choice defines the legacy we leave behind. And perhaps the most profound message is this: justice isn't about destroying those who hurt us. It's about inspiring them to change. When we choose empathy, we remind others and ourselves that healing begins not when the noise ends, but when understanding begins. Thank you so much for watching and sharing this journey with us. If this story touched your heart, please take a moment to like, share, and subscribe to our channel. Your support helps us bring more meaningful stories to life. Stories that remind us how compassion, courage, and kindness can still change the world.